Why has Europe experienced such a rapid adoption of electric vehicles? We know that the EU recently took over the #1 spot for EVs globally. So today we're going to unpack this question, but we're going to talk much broader about some of those key drivers that help to facilitate and enable electric vehicle adoption. And this discussion can relate to many nations around the world, as we know that countries, governments, corporates, all eyes and a lot of investment is going into this decarbonisation trend, and it's only continuing to grow in importance. It's a fascinating space. We'll look at one country, an example, as a little bit of a case study about how things can go when they do go really well in terms of EV adoption. And I'd love to know your thoughts on it all as we go throughout it. So where did this come about from? We're currently in Lisbon, the capital of Portugal. You might be able to see from the backdrop there, the sun is currently setting. It's been a wonderful day. I really actually enjoy Portugal. But we were sitting at the bus stop and saw a bus going by, 100% emissions free. And I was thinking, don't often see that at home. However, this is just one indication about the real focus on decarbonisation and zero emission vehicles in Europe that we've seen travelling around already thus far. It's not only battery powered electric vehicles, however, in terms of consumer transport, which we often think about initially. There's electric scooters. It's the broader electric mobility trend, and it's really permeating its way all the way through society. So it got me thinking, what are those key pillars that help to facilitate electric vehicle transition? And of course, this can be imposed onto any other frameworks, whether you're thinking about technology adoption or new industry development. But what are those key pillars? When I was thinking about it, they flow through sequentially. So initially, of course, it starts off with government and policy decisions. Then it flows through to the corporate and industry decisions, and ultimately they flow through and consumer and purchasing decisions are a function of those. So at the government level, policies are set, regulatory frameworks are developed, initiatives are rolled out, and of course that then flows through and you might see corporate and industry investment coming into the space. On the corporate side, they help to enable products to be developed, competition between them helps to bring down the cost curve as well, which helps to enable adoption. And of course, if the government sets the appropriate policies in place and the necessary investment comes in and it's a product that customers want, well then demand will naturally drive from that. In Europe, we've seen Europe is one of the largest polluters in the world at an EU level. Of course, nearly a quarter of their carbon emissions is actually coming from the transport sector. So there's a significant need to decarbonise, and there's a range of different policies coming into place. We know that Europe themselves are looking forward to 2035. They're starting to push forward some regulations that may mean that ICE vehicles, internal combustion engine vehicles, are outlawed by 2035. They're also aiming to be the first carbon neutral continent by 2050. So they've got large aspirations. As we know, when these regulations start to come through, there's really two different lenses that they look at. One is on the carbon emissions focus, and on the other side, it's on the zero emission vehicles side. And Europe has really been driving it. But what's fascinating about Europe itself is there are so many different member states. And so there's significant variance between the actual policies that they've all been developing. And that gives us an understanding and a bit of an insight into what happens when different levers are pulled and the potential flow-on implications that can happen throughout society. And so I just wanted to quickly talk about Norway. Norway has the largest rate of EV adoption per capita globally. Over 50% of new vehicle sales was electric vehicles. This is massive, especially when we consider last year we had around 8 to 9% penetration of new vehicle sales globally around the world. But what Norway has looked to do is pull a few different levers. Of course, there's tax cuts in terms of the EV side. There is a tax on the fossil fuel side as well. There's incentives, there's subsidies. But the incentives is where it really starts to get interesting. And this is where governments, particularly at a national level, can start to get creative about ways that they can incentivize their people, if this is something that they want to do, to hopefully look to drive EV adoption. Norway's got the 50% rule, which means that for things such as parking tickets or tolls, you get a 50% discount versus what a fossil fuel vehicle would pay for them. They also have bus lanes, which are opened up for EVs only. They've got a range of things that are incentivising this adoption, but as well, they're helping to bring down the costs of owning an EV vehicle. We know that the lifetime costs, of course, are cheaper in comparison for the running costs, but they're looking to bring down the initial startup cost as well of getting these vehicles, which means it's almost a no-brainer for people who are in the market for a new car. As we can see, this is successful at a micro level in terms of Norway. We know the northern regions, in particular in Europe, surrounding Scandinavia, have significant uptake, looking at Netherlands as well. But if we think about our own nations, our own regions, as this decarbonisation trend starts to pick up, there's opportunities for government to really set the tone, to help to push through this initial transition, which will help to drive investment like we've seen in Europe from Volkswagen, Stellantis, Tesla opening up Giga Berlin. And then as that investment comes through, the costs start to come down, and of course, more product choices open up for consumers, well then demand starts to drive through. We know that this decarbonisation trend is only in the very early innings. I'd love to know your thoughts on it all. Drop in a comment below. We've just opened up the second channel for investors. It's now live. Subscribe, turn your bell notifications on. Hope you enjoyed this video. New style as we tour around Europe. For now, thanks for joining us. Stay well and happy investing.